"You're going to stay with Aunt Miranda," said my mother one day, and that was that. I wish I could have said I was surprised, but even to 13-year-old me, it had been a long time coming. I never knew my father, and my mom's job involved transferring frequently. I'd heard her more than once on the phone with my grandma or my aunt, lamenting how all the moving was affecting my education and my social life. Truth be told, I had expected to be sent to a boarding school and not to a relative's, so I guess I took it better than she had expected, because she took me to the movies afterwards for the first time in years. She even bought me new clothes, which wasn't all that usual for her. If I had to say I was broken up about having to leave my mother, I would be lying. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't a bad mother per se, but she wasn't a particularly good one either. We lived together and she provided for me. She even got excited when I got good grades and she scolded me when I got bad ones. But we were never really emotionally close, and I don't think either of us were cut up about me leaving. I have no doubt that she loved me, after her own fashion, but it wasn't the sort of love where the thought of living without me would move her to tears. And who am I to judge? I was the same. My Aunt Miranda, or my Aunt Mimi as she insisted I call her, was a tall, broad woman with red gold hair that fell to her shoulders. I hadn't met her before, which wasn't all that shocking considering my mother had 12 siblings, and Aunt Miranda was a good 15 years older than her. By the time my mother was 5, Aunt Miranda had been married and was on the other side of the country. They had never really been very close or indeed talked that much at all, but they were still family, and apparently Aunt Miranda had heard through one of our brothers about our situation. She had 4 children, one who had just left for college the year before, and she had graciously offered to take me in. Their house wasn't very old. It had been built by Uncle Martin's father in a comparatively new town. Well, I use the word town loosely. It had maybe 4 or 5 shops, a movie theater, and a population of less than 200. My aunt's house was in a stretch of road where the majority of the residential houses were, bordered by the road on the front and the muir on the back. It's the muir, I guess, that this is really about. The muir was a mile-wide stretch of muirland which ended at the national highway a few miles away from our town. As I said before, it began right after the main residential area on the southern edge of our town. It seems strange to my child self that the residential area would be at the very edge of the town. But then again, these were mostly country houses with large yards. All along the border between the muir and the town was wooden fencing with little bells hung on posts every few feet apart. I asked my aunt about it at dinner. She smiled, though I remember thinking it was an unnatural smile. It seemed too bright compared to her usual ones. "Why, that's just a fancy the people who made the fence took. Now listen here, you are not to go near the fences. There are wild animals in the muir, and sometimes they wander close to the houses at night. You will be inside by dusk, and if I catch you outside, I will show you why you ought to be sorry for not listening." And it wasn't too far from the truth, I suppose. I was an obedient child anyways, and I had no friends to play with. Of her daughters, Lily and Gwen were 3 grades above me and already absorbed in their own circle of friends. Maddie, the one who was my age, disliked me from the start. We shared a room, but she would never say a word a bit into me, and sometimes I would catch her looking at me in a strange way. She must have pitied me for having a mother who wanted me sent away, and she wouldn't be the first. The years passed by quite nicely, if I may say so. I woke up at 6, fed the hens on the days it was my turn to do that chore, ate breakfast, went to school, and came home at 3 and read books in my room. We had a dial-up connection, but the computer was in my Uncle Martin's study and we had to get his permission if we wanted to use it. Sometimes at night, we'd hear howls from the muir, and every so often, those howls would move to the border fence. It was always windy at night and the bells rang every night for hours. Surprisingly enough though, I got used to the sound after a couple months. But I did spend those first few nearly sleepless because of the howls and the bells. When I was 15, I decided to get a job. By then, Lil and Gwen had moved out and I stayed in their room now. Maddie had softened up a bit, but still had a habit of falling silent and watching me when I was in the same room. I hadn't heard from my mother in over a year, and I was frankly worried that when the time did come for me to go to college, I would not have enough to cover the fees. I was a straight A student, but I didn't want to end up going to a community college 8 miles away. I could just imagine it. Uncle Martin driving me in his car to the college town that fell in the way of his work. Me getting off the old sedan and then walking through the narrow streets to the 2 buildings that badly needed a new coat of paint. The small classrooms with people from the neighboring towns packed into it. People who grew up hearing the bells in the halls. People who didn't think it was strange. People who were perfectly content to live their lives out like this. It was at my job of working as a grocery store assistant, a job which also consisted of delivering groceries to people who called the store to order something in addition to everything such a job usually encompasses. Restocking, shelving, acting as a cashier while the owner was out. That I met old Miss Hodgins. She lived out by the National Highway in a house that wasn't surrounded by bells. It made me curious and I wanted to know more, but she wouldn't tell me. Over times and visits, she told me bits and pieces. The bells, she said, were to warn off animals. Loud sounds scared them off, kind of like you banged on tin drums to scare away tigers, she said. I didn't know what to think about it at first, but I searched through the books in the library and it turned out that they did that too in India. She hadn't put them up because her husband scoffed at such an idea. He had a shotgun, and when he died at 37, the shotgun had become hers. She had children, 3, but they were all married and they lived far away. They didn't even come to see their mother once in 10 years, she said. I felt bad for her, but since I had to be home by 6, I couldn't really spend a lot of time at her home after school and work. But still, on the weekends, I would spend the time I usually did in school with her. She seemed grateful for the company, and she had a lot of books she would lend me. They weren't like the books in the library, too. They were thick leather-bound volumes of strange tales. Some of them were factual and some of them were fantasy, but I enjoyed both. Sometimes I would read to her and sometimes I would read sitting by her as she knit or dozed or did both in turns. Her eyes were turning badly and I suggested that she'd go to the doctor. When she refused because she had no money, I offered to pay for her with the money I made. She just scoffed and patted my head, and I would realize later that a nowhere town grocery store assistant didn't make nearly enough to upkeep the cost of an optometrist in those days. The year I turned 16, the summer was unusually hot. Aunt usually went around the house closing our windows and lighting mosquito repellents near 5. But even the risk of mosquitoes weren't enough to deter me from opening my window for an extra hour or 2 of wind one night. The day had been stiflingly hot and I had cycled back and forth delivering groceries. Our town was made up more and more of old people, it seemed. Not really surprising, it was stagnating. It's something that happens to most little podunk towns like this at some point or the other. It was 7:59 when I opened the window and I saw the thing. I don't know what it was. It looked at me from beyond the fence with the wildly ringing bells. Eyes of vacant milky white and body a glistening mass of black that blended in with the darkness of the evening. I didn't know what to do, but by some miracle, I didn't shout. All I could think was that I didn't want my aunt to hear me and know what I had done. I finally understood the real reason why she closed the windows and asked me to be back home by dusk. It snarled and tried to jump over the fence, but fell back as if it had slammed into an invisible wall. I closed the window and went back to reading what I was reading. The bells would hold it back, I knew. I wondered, too, about Mrs. Hodgins. How she could live in that little house surrounded by its beautiful herb garden and a white picket fence but with no bells. She told me of the wild animals and warned me to use the highway and not the muirland when coming to her. How she shooed me away as soon as it turned 4:30 so I wouldn't be out after dark. I wondered too, about how her husband had died and about her children who never came to visit her. The next day was a Saturday. As we were wrapping up, Miss Hodgins called the grocery store. She hadn't since the last Sunday, and I knew her groceries wouldn't last that long. I didn't know why she hadn't called before, and honestly speaking, I would have gone to her, not seeing what I had seen earlier that evening. It was 5, and my boss told me that I could go the next day. But Miss Hodgins was old, and she didn't have any groceries, and he finally relented on the condition that I take his car and not my bike there. It would cut the journey to her house from a solid 30 minutes to a mere 15. I would be back at my house comfortably by 6. I knocked on her door and I waited for a while. I could hear her shuffling around inside, but she was taking a lot of time to come to the door. I was still uneasy after yesterday, so after waiting for almost 10 minutes, I decided to put down the groceries by her door. She was probably in the bathroom, but I didn't want to drive along the highway between the Muirland and it had started to get dark. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything, and seeing something again would ruin that. As I turned to go, I heard the door open. Miss Hodgins smiled at me brightly. She smelled, and I wondered if she was showering properly. I would come tomorrow, I promised myself, and check up on her to see. "Come inside, child," she said. I was surprised, but immediately concern bloomed in my chest. Her eyes were going bad, and she was nearly 80. If she was asking me to stay, that must mean she was hurt. Could the gagging smell be an infected wound she couldn't reach? "What's wrong, Miss Hodgins?" I asked. "Come inside now," she said, sounding afraid. I looked for a second to gauge the sun's position, and my eyes caught the withering garden around her house. I looked back at Mrs. Hodgins. Her eyes had been going bad, but now they were a milky white. I smiled and I bent down to pick up the groceries. "I'll just pick these up and put them inside, okay? I know your back is bad and you can't do it yourself." A smile bloomed in her face. Her teeth were staining black and they smelled of rotten eggs. "Can you make some room for it in the kitchen?" I asked. She nodded and turned back to the kitchen, barely visible from the door. As she disappeared inside, I put down the bag in my hand and I booked it inside. I could hear her howl as I thanked God that I had left the car door open and the car running. I don't think I could have actually started the car if I had taken the keys off the ignition, because my hands were shaking. Before the door had even closed properly, I hit reverse. I could see Miss Hodgins now, her teeth bared as she howled and howled and howled. The white picket fences on the 3 sides of her house were now gone, and I wondered distantly how I hadn't noticed. I made a U-turn that had almost sent me tumbling into the Muir on the other side, and I floored the accelerator. It was 5:48 when I got home. I immediately called my boss to let him know that I'll have his car at the store tomorrow. He should send someone to Miss Hodgins' place tomorrow. More than one person. I told him that she wasn't her usual self. He went quiet and he didn't ask any more. The next morning, I awoke feeling horrible, because now I had the time to think. I realized how I had handled it badly. I should have been more honest with him. They would go to her place not knowing anything. I don't know what that thing was or what it could do to a person. I ran down to Uncle Martin and I told him everything. All he said was not to worry about it and to not tell Aunt Mimi. I found out later that they had found Mrs. Hodgins dead in her bedroom. She had been dead for at least 2 days now. I never asked anything about it. There were 2 more years till I was 18, and I spent those 2 years not speaking much at all. Maddie and I became closer somehow. We would sit in the same room and read, and when we would hear a howl or the bell start to ring, she would come sit by me. We started sharing the same room again, even though I never said anything about what had happened to her. My oldest cousin never wrote home or visited in the 5 years that I was there. After I left for college, I still wrote to Maddie frequently and to my aunt and uncle on the holidays. I don't think we were close. I drifted through life, and the only person I had ever felt actually closeness to was probably Mrs. Hodgins, but we stayed in touch. I tried my best to forget what had happened, and to forget about the things I had read in Mrs. Hodgins' books about certain herbs and herb gardens being used to ward off beings that had no names or description. And I almost succeeded until recently. I was looking through a real estate site when I came across a listing. The picture felt more familiar than my own face to me. It was a small cottage surrounded by remnants of a withered herb garden on 3 sides and the highway on the 4th. In bold red at the bottom of the listing, it was written, "Sold,